All right, well, I'd like to welcome you all here to the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science. Sarah Miller is our speaker tonight. She is the director for the Northeast region of the Florida Public Archaeology Network. I had to practice that before I could get it out that quickly and accurately. And Sarah worked with Charlie Ewan, who was a student with me at FSU, which tells you how old I am. And she has done work in Kentucky and has come here to Florida and is endeavoring to make sure people learn more about archaeology, appreciate the resources and the work that's being done here and the research that's being done, and they have a tremendous educational outreach program. The Florida Public Archaeology Network services all of the state of Florida, but we're fortunate that we've got a wonderful group of archaeologists and people headquartered in St. Augustine that service all of the Northeast Florida area, and we're within that district. So they're a tremendous resource. They do tremendous educational activities. And without any more advertisements or further ado, Sarah Miller.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm especially excited to be here during Florida Archaeology Month, where we get to really raise the banner and remind people we have World Heritage worthy sites here in Florida, and many very close within our perimeter here from the museum. And featured on the poster this year is Windover, so I've had a lot of fun directing people to come visit the exhibit here, because it's one of the few places in Florida where Windover is interpreted for the public. So I'm very grateful for the work that you all do here and to send the public down to enjoy the exhibits as well, and welcome you as you come up to St. Augustine. Before I get going, full force, so I'm just starting slowly, just take a little internal temperature reading. Think about King Tut's curse, the idea that anyone who had anything to do with the excavation of King Tut's tomb perished. Tragic death. Pause for a minute to think about the lost continent of Atlantis. And do you believe? Not sure. Don't believe. And ancient astronauts. The idea that aliens came down and built the monumental architecture that we see all over the world. So you don't have to raise hands or share, but just pause for a minute. On a scale of 1 to 10, how you're feeling. Now we're ready. Go ahead. Well, I'm here today to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, fantastic archaeology. And when I first signed up for a course in this 15 years ago, thought, this is going to be great. We're going to learn about all the great sites there is. Turns out we're learning about all the great sites that are not, because there's this whole specialization, this whole special field of fantastic archaeology. So we're going to break that down a little bit and see what the word fantastic means and what it's put in front of archaeology. Go ahead. And we're going to focus a little bit on historical frauds, myths, and mysteries, and then move into the Florida aspect of it as well. So a little caution. Some of you I know well, some of you I have not made to be my best friend yet, so I don't know what your feelings are, and I don't mean to offend anyone's belief systems. We are pretty open-minded. It's just my goal, and I'm going to just tell you the end at the beginning, is to increase your level of skepticism. Whether you believe it or not, do you question it? Do you pause for a moment to consider it? And what are the tools that you can build upon to start breaking these things down a little bit? So first, we're going to spend most of the evening talking about what archaeology is not. So let's make sure we know what archaeology is. Study of people of the past. We are hard scientists. We use a scientific method from beginning to end. Our ideas can be tested, retested, tried again by others, and most of the time within 20 years, we don't even believe our own theories ourselves anymore. We have improved upon them, and that's part of the scientific process. And I'm sadly understanding more about the peer review process right now. I know Patty's enjoying it as well, and what that's like, because not only is it looked at by peers to be authenticated and make sure we're providing public reliable knowledge, but you're really looking at it from 8 different points of view and trying to make sure it digests what the current thinking is right now. So that can be a very painful process of archaeology. So what archaeology is not, beliefs in religion are generally not testable. Default reasoning and you can't also just throw an idea out there. That's great in a jury trial, you're innocent till proven guilty. But in the world of archaeology, you've got to really be able to hold your ideas and theories to the mat and prove them. You can't just put them out there and say, well, it might be true, because we don't know for sure it's not true. To really make the statements we do, they really need to be tested. So fantastic archaeology is a branch of pseudoscience, and that's any field which claims itself to be science, but doesn't actually use the scientific method. So some of the classics in pseudoscience: Atlantis, Shroud of Turin, Piltdown Man, Cardiff Giant, crop circles, man on Mars, false landings. These are some of the typical ones. So we're really going to focus on Piltdown Man and Cardiff Giant as our historical examples. But if you have questions about the other ones, please bring them up. And I cut out a whole section on crop circles because I used to live in Iowa, or crop circles, and they really don't seem to be in the news as much, or maybe people have accepted them. But ask me about those if you're curious at the end. So the motives for these, they can be frauds, they can be myths, they can be things that we just don't understand. Why would somebody perpetrate that? Because some of those that I quickly read through some were by accident, but some there was intent behind deceiving people, that science had been used to authenticate, or that they've been written about in a scientific manner. Why would people do that? Why would they want the crop circles to be from the aliens?
Piltdown Man really was for 2 reasons.
Oh, wait, that's one of my historic examples. But you can say the motives. Okay, now you know what it is. I mean, for another project,
The British wanted their own ancient guy.
Okay, so
And they had an idea about what they thought he should look like, so they made the Piltdown Man look like what they wanted him to look like.
so nationalism, and also kind of forcing the square peg into the round hole. They just wanted it so bad to be true that they just shoved it right in there. Okay, so those are 2 reasons. What are other reasons why somebody might perpetuate a myth? Religious?
Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, and there the issue is the ink dates to a different time as the shroud. So it's a beautiful object and one worthy of contemplation, but using science to authenticate it is not going to work out well for the shroud. So religious purposes, definitely. Did I hear another motive for why somebody might do it? Money! Yeah. So get,
Relics.
yeah, you can make a lot of money off the relics and the sales of those, or the book tours about them. So money, fame, nationalism, religion, the capital R romantic past, mental instability. Yeah, that's actually cited in Kenneth Fetter's book as a reason, and it's you can get off track. And I added revenge and mistakes. Sometimes things are actual mistakes, and somebody may realize it, they may not realize it, but before you know it, the train has taken off and the momentum is there. So I do give people a little more room that they could be making benevolent mistakes and just gets carried away. So those are some of the traditional reasons. So what's the harm? One of my favorite sentences in Kenneth Fetter's book on the topic is, belief in nonsense can be dangerous. And I first thought it was kind of a funny sentence. Oh yeah, it can be dangerous. And I'm like, can be dangerous? Maybe it's not always dangerous. What's the harm in going all in on some of these myths? Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people actually make today decisions about the government or how we spend our money or something like that based on myth.
Yeah, it can divert from what we should be looking at, or can draw attention away from authentic issues.
Or give
Mm-hmm.
you the wrong impression of a certain group of people, and then they would be maybe excluded or looked down upon because of.
Because what are they saying? And in some of these mythical arguments, like the aliens building the pyramids.
Very
What's it
racist kind of
saying?
thing, that the
Yeah.
people there that did it couldn't possibly have done it because they weren't bright enough. They had to have aliens do it.
Can you all hear in the back? So just saying, it's a racist argument that they're looking down upon other cultures and also could divert the resources from protecting the actual groups of people or the traditions that created the objects as well.
That's the problem. They think they're right, but they're ignorant.
Yeah, so we're going to get them. We're going to set them straight. Tonight, we'll start writing letters. I will tell you, in our field, there is no reversing some thoughts. You can tell them over and over, we don't dig dinosaurs. And now we have just said the word dinosaur, and they're like, oh, I saw Sarah Miller, she said dinosaur. She studies dinosaurs. I mean, it's so innocent, and it's impossible in some places. So once that seed is planted, it's not something to be taken lightly, because you don't know how wild that weed can grow. So racism, other prejudices, diverts attention from real scientific discoveries. That sentence again, belief in nonsense can be dangerous, could be life-threatening, could be economically threatening, could be personally threatening. Embarrassment and fear of resource, and this is one I worry about a lot. We had some artifact days when we would identify artifacts, and we were trying to get at recording sites that had not been recorded. People care deeply about these objects, and to tell them it's not even an artifact or we had one woman who brought in what she believed was a pterodactyl skull. It was so special. It was a pterodactyl skull. And said, you have a lovely dolphin skeleton. And she said, no, it's a pterodactyl skull. And we're like, well, enjoy your pterodactyl skull. Because also you don't want to embarrass anybody, but at some point you do have to make a decision, where is that going to be dangerous? And financial loss. A lot of these do create a lot of funds and a lot of dollars that can go to waste when it could go to other things. Archaeological field projects would be grand, but there are other worthy projects out there as well. Did you have a question?
I'm curious, on the other side, who's deciding it's nonsense?
Yeah.
And that it is not true
Well,
to the ultimate.
and I think the art of debunking is really fascinating, because in our class we would show, Larry Zimmerman was my instructor, and he would show videos of things that were in popular science fields. Then he would turn the machine off, the VHS or beta, and he'd turn it off, and he'd run through all the points. I'm like, it's almost magical how he can go through and debunk all the points in the things that we were watching. So it's a skill, and it's an art, and it's not something just to take fully from Larry Zimmerman. Okay, he says that, I'm going to go out and authenticate the things he said, because who's Larry Zimmerman? Now I know he's a very revered and trusted person who's wrote letters of recommendation for me, so that's nice. I'm all in with Larry Zimmerman. Okay, go ahead. So we have two historical examples, and some of you in the audience, I bet, could state the cases of these better than I, but Cardiff Giant in 1869, a forgery. You can read the distinguished from the original, and I have some notes here. So a farmer, Stub Newell, found in his farm a 10-foot tall, a 3-foot wide giant. And this object created such a frenzy. Has anyone seen any of the Cardiff Giants? Yeah. So it created such a stir. I love this quote. Men left their work. Women caught up their babies and children in numbers and hurried to the scene where the interest started. So, people are running to see this 10-foot giant that came out of the ground. What is it? For a little context, the petrified forest in California was a big topic at the time. People were returning with the pieces of the trees, trying to explain, no, this used to be organic. This used to be a tree, this stone thing. So maybe there was some idea that it was actually a petrified giant. Maybe some people believed it was more of a statue, more of an object to a lost race of giants. So Stub Newell, the farmer, charged 50 cents per person a week to see the giant. 50 cents per person. He made $7,000 in the first 3 weeks. Back in 1869, he made $12,000 in the first 6 weeks. so 7,000 first 3 weeks. And then P.T. Barnum offered him $60,000 just to use the giant for 3 months. Do you think he said yes or no? He said no. He said no. He's denied. Barnum made his own giant. And then he also made a second one, a replica of that giant. So we laugh. All three are still generating money today. Oh, did you get goosebumps? Okay. Oh, my God. So people are still going to see these things. There's one in Cooperstown, New York. There's one in Baraboo, Wisconsin. There's one at the Barnum Museum. And the Barnum replica outdrew the original. So that's an interesting to think about, too. The fraud was eventually exposed. George Hall, he's a distant relative of Newell Stubb, and he confessed he was angry that people in the Bible would believe that there were 10-foot giants that walked the earth. So he was probably mocking, let's say definitely mocking religious beliefs. He had the limestone mined in Iowa, shipped to Chicago where artisans crafted it, and then brought to New York. He brought it to his distant cousin's farm and buried it for a year. And there's some funny stories when he first went to view the artist's work. He was really angry at the appearance of it. He attacked it with knitting needles. He threw acid on it and was apparently really pleased that the acid kind of made it look a little more veiny on the surface. They had hair on him for a while, and I think maybe he took offense because it looked a lot like him. And the giant is also naked. So in some of the viewings, they would put a little posterity covering over him. So professionals were eventually able to look at him and found that he was made of gypsum. So even though some people thought even then he could still be a large artifact, but he was found out because George Hull was found bragging, and they were eventually able to put together witnesses who had seen the limestone travel and move along the way over time. So motives, I mentioned a few if you were listening. What are motives behind the Cardiff giant? Money, fame, religion. And, you know, Mr. Hall, I don't think he benefited. Certainly the cousin did. But he was revenge and maybe a little insanity. I mean, to do all that, just to perpetuate a hoax is pretty far-fetched. So it's going to list those up there in a second. Oh, Piltdown man. We do not know who did this. We know it's a hoax, but we don't know who, so we can't exactly answer why, but we can hypothesize. Kind of like Cardiff giant, a farmer finds him in a field. And at this time, the origin of species is accepted, and people are on the rush for the missing link. They're trying to link people to the apes we descended from and to find the missing link between the two. And more the theory is going that there will be a humanoid-like head and an ape-like jaw, and that's how people develop. So they find this artifact out in the field in England. Yay, England! Finally gets its early human origin example, because they had not had one yet. They were having early finds in Europe, and they were having early finds over in Asia that really detracted attention, because the ones in Asia were showing, no, it was the jaw first and then the head. So it was a contrary theory and got greatly dismissed by the Asian studies because of Piltdown man. It was found, a few notes here. So the farmer found him, and he contacted Woodard, who was at the British Museum coming to see the site in 1906. Woodard gets out there and accepts in 1909, so already 3 years has gone by. So this is Piltdown in a section of England, and Woodward first publishes in 1912 that he believes the remains are 500,000 years old. And there's Piltdown, there's Dawson who discovered it, and I think there's Dawson and Woodard going out to look at it. So this hoax is also famous for going on for so long, because it really took about 40 years for them to debunk this. But go forward one more, because it kind of shows the human-like head portion and the jaw-like portions that they were looking for there. What they found was they didn't have access to the collections for a long time, and Woodard greatly wanted into the Academy of Sciences, and part of the site was not able to have other researchers come see it, and the collection was kind of on lockdown for a while. So that's part of why it went on for so long. But when it was examined, and I have the year in, by 1935, they had found Neanderthal examples in Britain, and it just wasn't quite piecing it together. So they started looking at it more closely. In 1949, the fluoride measurements were different from the head pieces to the jaw pieces. They were off by thousands, by millennia. And then in 1953, they looked and were able to see that it was a modern skull, chemically altered and stained, and that the jaw was of an orangutan, and the teeth had been intentionally drilled down so they could see the drill marks on there. Yeah. Now, getting to who did it, there's over 21 published suspects of who they think did it. Some of them are outlined in Fetter's argument. Maybe it was Dawson, because he got to have the species named after him as the finder and as his farm. And Dawson did stain the bones, but that was something that was done during that time. Woodard is a good guess, because he had the access and the credibility, and had also looked at other exotic fossilized remains that were found on the farm. If you want to know more, there's a great PBS special, The Boldest Hoax, and they go through it because there's 21 other ideas about who maybe did this and why. So, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody plant those?
To show how easily scientists are fooled.
Yeah, he could have been angry at that for sure. Yeah, and there's a part of it, because it did go undebunked, if that's a word, for so long. But I think that access, anytime you see something that raises your skepticism, start thinking, who else has looked at it? What's the access? Can other archaeologists go visit it? Can the public go visit it? So I think that was an interesting note that came up here as well. So alien visitors, and I, for one, hope that there are aliens in other parts of the universe. We cannot be here alone. So I am not here to talk to you that aliens do not exist. I'm just saying a lot of the great monumental pieces in the world, a lot of the great world art in the world, to deflect and say they were made by aliens, for me, doesn't do it when there can be a whole suite of evidence to show how these things are perpetuated in other works of art, how they transition over thousands of years to become what they do, represented in some of the iconography that we see. And then it was a strange moment in Indiana Jones, the final one, where it was revealed, like, aliens. I'm like, oh no! You might as well just add a dinosaur bone at the end. The dinosaur belongs in a museum. It just felt like, it just set us back a little bit. In Eric von Daniken's book in 1968, the idea that ancient artifacts are too advanced for simple prehistoric human intelligence and ingenuity is a pretty loaded sentence. So Kenneth Fetter went and analyzed von Daniken's books, and he started looking at where in the world are the sites that are being focused on in these books. And lo and behold, the number and the percentages in Europe are way down compared to other parts in the world. So this is part of what he uses as lines of evidence to say, you know, it's not a pattern seen globally. There are certain places we're saying people did not have this capacity more so than others, and that's something to be critical and think more about. And hyperdiffusionists, I got really fascinated with the hyperdiffusionists. I don't think we have that issue so much in Florida, probably because we do have really early contact by Europeans. So maybe it's like a Midwest thing where they get really jealous. They're like, oh, we want our thing. We want to have some of the examples that I have coming up. So Barry Fell is, I believe, a marine biologist is what he has his PhD in, and started publishing these books about these great transoceanic voyages. And it's not that a singular one couldn't happen. It's just we have no evidence to support settlement or long-sustained activity, no artifacts, and certainly no features that plant people in place. So you end up with things like Barry Fell loved Ogham. It's a Irish Celtic-based language that has no vowels. I am a Morse code aficionado because my dad's a ham radio operator. So I went for one of my papers in college. I looked at what he was translating these scratch marks into Ogham and getting these great sentences. I'm like, I'm going to put it into Morse code with the dits and dashes, and also got some fascinating, almost fortune cookie-like phrases out of it, especially when you take the vowels out, because Ogham has no vowels, so you can make up quite a bit of things. Now, an archaeologist sees this, and we know right away what that is. It's knife sharpening marks. You see them all over in caves. It's a great way to sharpen a tool. Yeah, that's what that says. It's something. It's a billboard. No, it's just resharpening a lot of the time. And the Kensington runestone has anyone been there? Oh, we love it in Minnesota. It's really hard to talk to some people about it because Charlie Ewan had his cat named Kensington because quite a fan of, he's a Minnesotan. But the idea that Vikings came to Minnesota, had they even possibly made it that far, they just left nothing. And something about Vikings, they're messy, crazy people. They're going to leave stuff all over, and they left nothing. Here is an authentic site. What do you have? If you go to Lasanso Meadows, you walk around, they have dwellings, small dwellings, outbuildings, workshop. They have a furnace, a blacksmith shop. That's what we're talking about. We need something in the ground that shows a little longer duration of settlement and proof that people were there, and also the objects to go with them. So at Lasanso Meadows, they do have these structures. They have the features, and they have the artifacts. There is nothing going on at this time in Canada that could explain the ring pin and bronze. They have evidence of cooking. They have evidence of just making stuff and throwing it away. So lots and lots of trash. People do not go anywhere without leaving lots and lots of trash. So Lasanso Meadows is an authentic site. Moving into Florida with our ambassador, Skunk Ape, I was giving this talk in Putnam County, and they're like, oh, it's the Bogart booger. Have you ever heard of that? Oh, you just went, oh! And I looked it up, and it was a book on the Bogart booger. There's a little town of Bogart, because for a while when you drove from St. Augustine to Gainesville, there was a cutout in the woods about this tall. Did anyone else see it? Well, I never got a picture because it's on a highway, so you can't really pull over. But I'd look for it each time, and then I think when there was a reason they took it down, and I couldn't explain to anyone. No, I swear it used to be there. But I thought it was a cutout. Maybe it was a real thing. But there is no. Could he be true? Anything could be true. Is there any evidence it's true? There's no evidence. There's no skeletal evidence. There's no mass collection of coprolites that we can look to their poop to see what they are eating. So I think it's a lot of fun, and there's all sorts of TV shows that are built on it. So that's fine, but when I get tangled in with someone who has scientifically proven that there are skunk apes, then I want to see a little bit more information. I want to see data. I want to see the bone. Patty wants to see the bones. There's no bones for Patty to look at. So be skeptical and have fun. Some of these are fun. I was giving this talk in near Putnam County, and had Googled something about, I was Googling about Mount Royal, which is a very significant site. It's owned by the state. It's on the St. Johns River. It was a prehistoric mound. It was used during the mission period. Very interesting site. When I Googled it, up came the landing schedule for aliens. I was like, what? So I thought, I'm going to go out there. And I saw nothing. But it was interesting. If somebody was Googling information, as I was, on Mount Royal Indian Mound, that's what they would be directed to. Would they then be tempted to go out and visit the site? Maybe more, maybe less, but for very different reasons. Where is Fort Caroline? And I just can't believe it just keeps coming up every year. Have you heard much down here about Fort Caroline and the multiple theories? And it's interesting to read about them historically and then to live through them as they're happening. There's great confusion. The phone calls come from where you don't expect, and you think, well, I'm going to call the park headquarters people at the MPS site that owns it, make sure they're aware of it. I've never heard of that person. They said, what? What do they have? So it's amazing the miscommunication at the beginning of a lot of claims, or the perpetual support of information without anything further. No archaeological evidence, various historical elements that don't quite make sense. So this Fort Caroline keeps coming up, and it makes sense around the 450th of Fort Caroline that it should draw extra attention. And maybe it's not a bad thing as long as people come away with the information of how important and significant that French settlement was on the St. Johns River that originally had its name Rivière de Mai. Why is it named Rivière de Mai, the St. Johns River?
What's it called?
Rivière de Mai. The French landed there May 1st, so they named it River of May. So that's, I mean, I think the history of the French along that river is so long, is so sustained. To hear it attacked does it you know, I start to take it personally. And then the theories don't hold up. A lot of the artifacts that they show have no diagnostic attributes. They can just be little bits of metal. And by the way, how did they get that? Because they were on federal property, and that was breaking some of the laws, so it becomes pretty tricky. And as far as I know, the recent claim that there's a couple. One that's in South Carolina, one that it's on the St. Mary's River in Georgia. Those two are still out there. I think the one that it was an island close to where Fort Caroline, this is all a replica that they've constructed in this site, but that there's an island near there that featured some elements, so they sent a crew out, and it's just a spoiled pile. They did not find evidence of Fort Caroline. So there's the update on that. We'll look forward to next year's update of where people think it is next year. But as far as we know, it's in that general location, and it's probably buried in the river. That river got channeled and changed so much that you have entire bluffs disappear in our own historic time. So quite a dramatic landscape. And there's another debate too, because in the Lemoyne drawing it showed as three-pointed and triangular, but there's a journal entry that shows it two-sided. So even the actual shape of the fort is still debated. And forts. The year Archaeology Month was forts. Oh, we had all the fort fun because people want so much to believe different forts are in different places. Let's play fort, not a fort. Not a fort. What are we looking at? Yeah, this is in downtown New Smyrna Beach. A little misleading, as it's called, Old Fort Park, right? Not a fort, and I believe part of the issue is during the WPA, they were paid to do some reinforcements on it, and maybe at the time, did they believe it was a fort at the time? Because I believe they did, and then they refortified it to look even more like a fort. It's not a fort, it's a foundation during the Turnbull Plantation British period era. So it's a really ginormous foundation. You can go see it and walk around it today, and it also has some nice historic artifacts that are into the mortar. And go see Dot Moore at the New Smyrna History Museum. She'll take you on a lovely tour walking around. You should tell her I said that too. She'll love it. I'm like, Sarah Miller, ah! And where did Ponce land here? So I didn't think this through. This is probably very controversial. But the point for me is we don't know. But can we all stand together that he didn't land in Georgia? Can we agree? Okay. Because we don't actually know where he landed, and hope to God it wasn't in Georgia. But, you know, the sighting and the placement of the plaque at the 38-degree mark is a bit complicated, as we know. And the other placements are very difficult because there is no archaeological evidence to link where Ponce landed. Now, Carl last year, he found a site and it had long occupation of prehistoric use and olive jar. And the more he tried to think and explain the site, and I started to think, like, is that what like a Ponce Landing site would look like? I mean, what would it look like? It would probably be so brief to begin with. There might not be anything left. And a lot of these accounts, even of the readings, you know, they didn't come ashore. on the 500th anniversary of the reading of the coordinates. I went out. Did anyone else go out to that commemoration? It was lovely. There were lots of people there. There was new signage, the new statue, but it was just kind of two guys walking up on the beach, reading the coordinates in Spanish and walking away. And I don't know why. I thought there was going to be a ship. I thought it was going to be like this grand thing. I'm like, where's the boat? But it was, I will say, I do respect the reenactors quite a bit because that took a lot of courage, and it did help place the day for me as I was doing something to celebrate the 500th. In the Fountain of Youth, and this is where this capital R romantic, look at him, he's gorgeous, and his pantaloons, and he's got the trees, and he's got people bowing down, the spring, the Fountain of Youth, eternal life, and this has been debunked because Fountain of Youth myth didn't exist in the time of Ponce de Leon. So there is not the Fountain of I've drank it. I've not seen healing properties yet. So there's that. And what is the Fountain of Youth? Archaeologists know it for a very different reason. What do we know it for? What's really there? Whose statue should be at the Fountain of Youth site? Menendez! It's the actual landing site of Pedro Menendez, 1565, founding of our cities 450 years ago in September coming up. And, we have the Ponce de Leon statue. So I'm telling you, it's a very schizophrenic feeling for a visitor, and there's no recorrecting that. I talk to people all the time. It's like, oh, I went to the Ponce de Leon landing site. I'm like, where were you? No, you didn't. So authentic archaeology at Fountain of Youth. If you had Kathy Deegan up, if you were lucky enough to score her instead of me tonight and say, did you find Menendez landing site? I think she'd wiggle some way of saying the evidence we have highly suggests through this and this and this and this that this is the near landing site. She would be very cautious. Do you know how long she has excavated there? I don't want to out her for her age because maybe she did drink from the fountain. She's been there 40 years. 40 years. Her date on her map that I got to go see her out in the field during my interview said 1976. Yeah. What? So she's been there that long. How long was Menendez at this site? Come on, history nerds, where are you? 9 months. He was there 9 months. She has spent 40 years excavating the site. These people were there for 9 months. So just reflect back for a second to these transoceanic voyages, the Phoenicians settling in Iowa. Like, even if they were there for a short period, there's no end to the features, to the debris, to the artifacts that we can point to and say, this came from Spain. This was made in Spain, probably in this village because it matches this, and then look at the post holes, all sorts of things that go in there. Okay, go ahead. And lots of little finds too. A lot of the beads and, Kathy has done a great job publishing and sharing at conferences and with her graduate students. And it's tough, to get thrown to the mat for being accurate, but that's what you've got to do. So we're going to look at another example that will look a little similar for just a moment. The White site. So I started to get a few calls from people first saying, oh, they found the Ponce de Leon landing site. I'm like, are you at the Fountain of Youth? They're like, no, we're in Ocala. I'm like, Ponce de Leon in Ocala. So I tracked it down, and it is the claim of the DeSoto site, because all the does are the same, I guess, so we end up with DeSoto. And this, look at it, archaeologist, Dr. Ashley White. If you look him up, I think he's a chiropractor. He's not an archaeologist. And he owns the site, and they had shown some artifacts. There were very early articles. If you go home tonight and Google the White site, Ocala, you will get some articles that really make a strong, persuasive argument. Wow, we found DeSoto. DeSoto came around in 1539. And I love, because he's 39, too, when he comes, he was born in 1500, so you know how old he is as the years go by. So in 1539, he was 39 walking around. And they have a winter encampment site in Tallahassee that's well known and established. And so this would be another point on the map, because a lot of the places DeSoto went on his journey are unknown. His track is largely confusing to try and reconstruct. So if we can plant another pin, that would mean a lot to Florida history. So out he comes with this idea that he's got DeSoto era artifacts, that he's got a site, and we want to know about it. Can we come visit it? Can he come talk to us? Can we come see the artifacts? He sends a bunch of photographs to Jerry Milanich, who has bought it completely and said, this is another site. I'm 100% certain. So you'd have Jerry Milanich saying, hey, you take that pretty seriously. Well, it's a confusing site because there is a known recorded Spanish mission on his property. So he was not ever saying that it didn't date to the 17th century, but that this was an earlier occupation attached to that older one. So when they looked at the archaeological record, they were still looking a lot at this later mission site. This is one of the lines of evidence, just one of the many used, of a bead saying, oh, this is DeSoto era. So they sent us, and a specialist at the Smithsonian looked at it. She said, number one, I believe it's a bead made in India in the 1850s. And for two, I think it's the same bead that's just been moved around. Oh, so could it be? It could be. Not sure, but this site has now been very well debunked. There are 17 different points of argument, and Jerry Milanich has very much reversed his thinking, and it just shows too how we want these discoveries to be true. If we're shown just a little piece of the evidence, it could start. You could make some early statements in high hopes, but a lot of times they have to be brought back down. Now, did he ever come and present at the state archaeological meeting? No. We never saw him, we never met him. And again, he presents himself as an archaeologist, and he's not an archaeologist, he's a landowner. So it was very, very confusing thing that hit just a couple years ago. Okay, so this is the winter encampment site. It was a very public, open dig. They have lots of artifacts, they have lots of features, there's been lots published about the site. So they were able to prove it was the site based on the presence of pigs, because we know DeSoto had pigs, and to have that early of artifacts and the pigs kind of put the nail in it. And then I bring up the Vero Man site because it's been something that has been in the news recently. So the Vero Man site and the Vero Man dig, and Mercyhurst has recently returned to the site, and I saw today a great quote by the field manager when he was asked about this artifact. This is supposedly the oldest piece of art in North America, maybe beyond 12,000-year-old drawing of a mammoth on a bone that could be mammoth or sloth. I think they weren't sure what animal exactly it was on. And so when they asked the Mercyhurst, because this bona fide dig is going on in Vero, and Andy Hemmings says, I have no other obligation, says Andy Hemmings, director of the current excavation at the Vero Man site, where Ice Age animal bones and human bones are believed to have been found together 100 years ago. It doesn't do me any good to see neat things when I don't know where they came from. That's useless to me. I can't do anything with it. I have to take somebody's word for it. It's undocumented and it's not useful scientifically. And what he's trying to convey is a collector had found many pieces had been stored in bags underneath his sink of matrix that had come from areas beyond where the Vero Man site was, had been there for a long time, I think up to 2 years underneath his sink, when he washed them and discovered this. And this has become a very controversial artifact even today. I think it's really splitting a lot of opinions of archaeologists. Here's where my spidey senses go off. He wanted to sell the artifact, of course. He does have a medical condition. He does need the money. You know how much he asked for it? $1 million.
Oh.
Did he get it?
No.
Hope not.
I don't think we know, because University of Florida said, the best we could afford. They made him an offer back for $80,000 and he turned it down. So the last I looked, it was an undisclosed amount published, and said that he couldn't say even how the object left the state that was purchased in trust. So if anybody has an update on an amount, because I'm dying to know. But so two things. One, when you're selling artifacts, there's a benefit that's in there that's skewing the intentions and motives, and also that the context is just so poor for where this artifact came from. But the Vero site is still going on today. That is the most carefully excavated site I have seen in my life. So having been out there and met with them, I'm deeply interested in what they find in their authentic study of the site. Sugar mills at Spanish missions, God, aren't they gorgeous? You can just imagine the ceremonies being conducted by the, they're not Spanish missions. That has been debunked a long time. But some of them are still called the Spanish Mission on Spanish Mission Road. There is no standing existing remnant of a Spanish mission in Florida. There's one architectural element of a Spanish mission. Does anyone know where it is? It's a Convento door sill in Fernandina Beach at the Amelia Island Museum. They still have the door sill from their mission. That's the only above ground existing piece of a Florida mission. And then we get a lot of calls about the pyramids at the National Museum, and they're from the Dade Massacre. So that's not a cultish thing. That's a sign of respect for the veterans who passed during that massacre. Although for a while they did have a sign saying there are 1,403 people buried under these 3 pyramids that are out there. But that's not, it was a very precise number on the plaque, like 1,403. They've now removed the plaque. I don't know if my talk had anything to do with it, but they don't even know how many wagons brought the jumbled remains. So we don't know how many people are buried underneath those pyramids, but they're stunning. You should go visit them. 10 Commandments found in Israel. 2,000-year-old letter from Jesus found. Good, yeah. Okay, stop there. Y'all, all these are published in Florida. So this is what I mean by we got a capital R romantic over-the-top issue. I think we just breed it. So getting back to the dangers and just to review and kind of wrap up, kind of ahead and hit it. So we can see some of the examples of how the pseudoscience behind some of the sites can lead to racism and other prejudices, or instill that, or make it even institutional in what we publish and believe down the road. Diverts attention from real scientific discovery. It just drives me crazy to have that whole rich, interesting, diverse site of Menendez Landing site, and then still have the Ponce legacy looming over us in town. I guess those were my 2 points. So, temperature reading. Now, I don't know where your numbers were to start, and maybe they just moved around a little bit. But what's fascinating is Kenneth Fetter, when he taught a survey course, so a whole semester, and believe me, when you get a whole semester of this and all the systematic debunking, you start to move your skepticism meter all the way over. So he did a pretest, like we had done, a few more points on it. At the end of this, and they were right here. At the end of the semester, shoo, they were way on the heavy skepticism. 5 years later, they're back. So skepticism is a skill. You have to develop and hone it. You have to practice it. You have to keep it up. When you've read it, go back and reread it 5 years from now, because you are going to find yourself back into the older, deeper channel of where your thinking used to be. So keep being skeptical. I handed out a sheet, the baloney detection kit. You know, the best thing, Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is most likely right. And it just works time and time again. Independent confirmation, like how do you trust the archaeologists or how do you trust the scientists? When Tom Delahaye discovered a 27,000-year-old site in South America, he didn't hide any of it. He invited everyone that could make it, I guess, pay the ticket down, to come see the site, to come throw him to the mat, to look for other comparative sites, to have that independent confirmation. And every chain must work. There can't be a link chain in the argument. Then the logic doesn't flow from there. But it's a good one, and if you haven't read the book, The Demon Haunted World is just a great popular publication I think anyone would enjoy. And for more information, I usually tote this book around to the class because it's kind of the Bible of fantastic archaeology. Oddly enough, the book called Fantastic Archaeology is huge and can be quite dense. So if you're going to go with one, I'd say one of these two up here. Cult Archaeology and Creationism, and then those bottom two below are also quite good. All right, so you have your assignments. Stay skeptical, keep reading, email me with questions, and I'll throw a lot of details from this presentation up on the blog tomorrow. All right, thank you.